Vaccine hesitancy on the wane. Biden's big infrastructure plan dropping today, and the final four is set. Wednesday, need to know. Solo. Let's go. Good Wednesday morning. This is Cheddar's Need to Know podcast for March 31st, the last day of March. I'm Carlo Versano, as you can see, and here I am here solo. Jill called me last night as I was going to bed. She has a childcare issue today, so all is well, but she just needed the morning to deal with some stuff, so she will be back tomorrow. In the meantime, I will take you through the news today, and we've got a fair amount of it. I want to start actually with Texas. So it's been 3 weeks today since Texas dropped that mask mandate and basically reopened. And check this out, new cases, they're at their lowest level in that state since last June. So that big surge has just not happened. Experts think it's partially due to vaccinations playing a role, even though Texas' vaccine rollout not particularly good by any stretch of the imagination when you compare it to other states. It could also have to do with the weather. You know, we know that the COVID doesn't like heat, doesn't like humidity. That may have something to do with it. Might have something to do with voluntary mask use. People still using masks when they're in public as they see fit. We don't really know for sure, but at least right now, the surge that many of us have predicted for Texas has not taken hold in that state. That's good news, and the same goes for Mississippi, which followed Texas a day later with dropping their own mask mandate. As for vaccinations, nearly 30% of Americans are now at least partially vaccinated. Half of seniors have been fully vaccinated. That's a great, fantastic milestone. We're making fantastic progress here. A large survey conducted by the Census Bureau that just came out. Also, some really good news, finding that vaccine hesitancy is shrinking as vaccination uptake rises. And this is especially true in the South and also among Black Americans. So look at the statistic. Just 17% of U.S. adults now say they definitely or probably won't get vaccinated. That's down from 22% in January. It was even higher back last year. And that number is going down in every state except for the following: North Dakota, Tennessee, and Wyoming. Wyoming, for whatever reason, it's actually going way up. Go figure. But you know, I've been predicting this right here on this podcast, and I'm extremely heartened to see it coming true. It's sort of it's what we were talking about, right? People are a little hesitant. They see their neighbors, they see their family getting it. They're not turning into lizard people, so maybe it's not so bad after all. The analogy that I think coming to my mind is sort of like when you're at a wedding, right? And nobody wants to be the first person on the dance floor, but then there's always like that drunk couple who goes right out there and just starts going for it, and then everyone's like, "Oh, I can do this," and then other people join, and then you got yourself a big dance party. So that is not a particularly good analogy, but you get the idea. As for myself, I got my vaccine appointment yesterday when eligibility opened in New York. So I am all set. I'm going in to CVS on Saturday. The bad news is I have to do something that I hate doing, which is going to Staten Island. But I kid Staten. Staten, what up? It's not so bad. But yes, so I've got my first appointment on Saturday. Things are looking up, and I'm going to ask Jill tomorrow if she has managed to make her appointment. Okay, to politics we go. President Biden headed to Pittsburgh today. He's going to announce a major infrastructure package. This is the bill that a lot of people have been waiting for. It's going to include significant aid for working parents among its proposals. Talk about that, why that's important politically in a second. But the first phase of this Build Back Better package that they're calling it, it's going to focus on spending for quote unquote hard infrastructure areas, things like transportation, broadband, the water supply, and it's going to cost $2 trillion. That will be paid for by permanently raising the corporate tax rate from 21 to 28%. That's the plan. The second phase is going to focus on what the administration is calling soft or human infrastructure. And this is where it gets kind of interesting. Spending for things like family tax credits, universal pre-K, childcare. And this would be paid for by raising taxes on the wealthy. It doesn't really, we're not exactly sure what that means when the White House says we're raising taxes on wealthy people, remember Biden has pledged that he will not raise taxes on people earning less than $400,000 a year, but otherwise the details are a little sparse. It's also unclear how this is going to get through Congress as a budget reconciliation matter, since they wouldn't be able to break the filibuster on this, I don't think. But they're going to try and get some Republican votes. And I think what's happening in terms of this sort of reframing infrastructure as human infrastructure, sort of investing in human capital, that's really politically smart. And I was going to ask Jill today, just as a working mom, what she thinks. I mean, does she feel like the federal government has had her back this past year? My guess would be no, and I'm sure many working parents, especially working mothers, not even working mothers, just mothers in general, would agree with that. So I think, moms vote, women vote, and they have long memories, as all voters do in a lot of ways. So to see a package like this that could potentially, make it easier for them to raise their children, that's going to go a long way for the Democrats, I think. Okay, I do want to mention the story that the New York Times dropped last night to big fanfare. Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida. He is under federal investigation over an alleged sexual relationship he had with a 17-year-old girl. The DOJ said to be looking at whether Gaetz violated federal sex trafficking laws by allegedly paying this minor and perhaps others to travel over state lines. That would be a federal crime. Gaetz, who of course is one of former President Trump's most vocal and sort of flamboyant allies in Congress, he went on Tucker Carlson last night on Fox, where he acknowledged that he's under investigation. He denied any criminal wrongdoing. Tucker, for what it's worth, as soon as the interview was over, called it, quote, the weirdest interview I've ever conducted. So Tucker Carlson, probably the most powerful person in Republican politics, with the possible exception of Donald Trump. So when he throws you under the bus like that, that is a bad sign for your political career. And Axios had reported earlier in the day that Gaetz was actually looking to leave Congress to get a job at Newsmax, one of those sort of proto-Fox News right-wing streaming channels. So when that came out, I remember thinking to myself, well, that's a little bit weird. Why would you leave a completely safe Republican seat to go on some news channel that nobody watches? Then this story comes out, put two and two together. There's definitely something up here. But as of now, these are just allegations. This investigation appears to be in its early stages, and we don't really know much else. Okay, to Minneapolis in the Derek Chauvin trial. The young woman who shot that infamous cell phone video of Derek Chauvin kneeling on George Floyd's neck, she was one of six bystanders, who testified yesterday that they tried in vain to convince Chauvin to remove his hold on Floyd. Another bystander, an off-duty firefighter, she testified that she told police, identified herself that she was a firefighter, and that she pleaded with them to check Floyd's pulse, but they were pretty much unmoved, didn't do anything. Really just moving, searing testimony yesterday, if you were able to watch any of it. These witnesses all painted a very consistent picture of what happened that day, what they saw. They all also described just feeling traumatized and guilty about not being able to help. I thought that was really remarkable. Each one of them just talked about how they have like nightmares and just this sort of feeling of PTSD about what they saw and that they weren't able to do anything about it. It was really, really emotional stuff. The defense so far has been pretty much arguing that Chauvin was just sort of doing what he was trained to do, that he was following police protocol, which to me itself is sort of a horrific indictment of policing in America. We'll get more testimony today in that trial. Okay, moving to the economy. Americans are optimistic, very, very optimistic about the state of the economy over the next few months. The monthly consumer confidence reading came out yesterday. Pretty fascinating. It jumped to its highest level since the onset of the pandemic. Still short of the pre-COVID level it reached last February, but still, people are raring to go. They are looking to spend. The data basically suggests that consumers planning to make big ticket purchases, whether it's a car, a truck, appliances, even a home, as the pandemic recedes, stimulus checks are cashed, businesses reopen, things start to go back to normal. So this is going to really, be a shot in the arm to the economic recovery, at least in the short term. But when you dig into some of this data, check some of this out. Those who plan to buy a car or truck, highest it's been since July. People who plan to buy a major appliance like a stove or a fridge, highest since last February. People who plan to buy a home, highest since that survey began in 1967. And this also coming as a separate economic report showed home prices in this country rising at their fastest rate in 15 years. This is adding to concerns about inflation. But home prices up 11% year over year. That's according to the Case-Shiller Index. We have not seen a housing bubble like this probably since at least 2007. It's look, again, I've said it before. I'm not going to tell people how to spend their money or invest in themselves, but I just would not buy into this if I didn't have to. It just has all the makings of a bubble that can't really go on. Okay, moving to entertainment, the Oscars. Well, they're less than a month away, and it's pretty much anyone's guess what this thing is going to look like this year. The producers had previously said that the rule this year is going to be that nominees have to show up in person, or they might as well not show up at all, right? So they're trying to avoid putting the TV audience to sleep with just Zoom acceptance speech after Zoom acceptance speech, which, as we've seen from past award shows, is just a snooze fest at the least. It's actually almost anxiety producing in some ways to me. But a lot of the attendees of the Oscars are expressing concerns about having to actually get to Los Angeles, especially from abroad, where cases are spiking. So what the show is doing to sort of alleviate those concerns is they're going to set up these hubs in Paris and London where nominees can go accept their rewards and I guess sort of at least kind of participate in the actual show. That show, by the way, it's going to be coming from Union Station in Los Angeles. There's not going to be a traditional red carpet. The producers say it's going to sort of be kind of like a cocktail party. So it could be cool. We'll see. There's also this issue with out-of-town nominees, even if they're in the country, having to actually get to LA, because LA has one of the strictest quarantine rules in the country right now. 10 days, I believe, is the current rule. So I think there's a lot of, movie stars or, big-name Hollywood heavy hitters who don't exactly want to follow that rule. So they're trying to figure out what to do about that. I think the Oscars said that they'll pitch in to pay for, the economic hit of having to quarantine for 10 days. So yeah, Oscars, April 25th, Union Station. And I appreciate that they're putting their foot down on no virtual acceptance speeches. These shows, we've talked about it on this pod, the ratings are down, and it's not hard to figure out why, right? They're just kind of a slog to watch. Those acceptance speeches are brutal enough as they are, even when people are on stage. So, when you have people coming from their homes and just, bad internet connections, nobody wants to watch that. Okay, we've got ourselves a Final Four. Gonzaga, Baylor, UCLA, and Houston. They're going to the big dance. In the men's, Gonzaga steamrolling USC last night. UCLA upset the top-seeded Michigan. Apologies to Jill to punch their ticket. By the way, Jill is not off today because she stayed up late watching the Michigan game. So I just want to make that clear. She's not playing hooky. But anyway, yeah, Gonzaga now 2 wins away from their first national championship and the first wire-to-wire undefeated season since Indiana did it back in '76. Meanwhile, in the women's tourney in San Antonio, South Carolina humiliated the Longhorns 62-34. Incredible. Stanford knocked off Louisville. They will join UConn and Arizona in the women's Final Four field. Those games are Friday night, so you can watch those. And then the men's will follow on Saturday. So good weekend of college hoops. All right, guys. Before we go, I know we're a little short today, but I don't have Jill to talk to. So that's what happens. But before we go, today we're going to remember the life of Teri Leiker, who was one of the victims of the Boulder shooting. Teri was a grocery bagger at the King Superstore in Boulder. She had worked there for 30 years. She was intellectually disabled and part of a program at the local college at UC Boulder that paired students with members of the community who had developmental disabilities. She was remembered by her family as somebody who was this is really just so sad to me, but she was really deeply affected by tragedies in the news. They talked about how she always wanted to donate to causes, whether it was an earthquake or just any tragedy that she saw. She was just that it affected her that deeply. She also loved Disney movies. Regular shoppers at that store remembered Teri as somebody who would never let them bag their own groceries, which is I always appreciate that. So she died at the only job she ever held, at the age of 51 years old, one of the 10 people whose lives were extinguished that day. Okay, on that solemn note, I will leave it there. That's what you need to know for Wednesday, March 31st. We'll see you in April, guys.